So welcome everyone. I have a great guest this week on the show, and it's my pleasure to introduce Caryn Lee. She's the founder and managing partner of Narrative. She's a consultant, a coach, and a speaker, and a whole lot more. We met a couple of years ago, I think it was, but I know there's a lot more to your experience than what I just gave our audience. So if you would, give us a little bit more context on who you are, what you do.
Okay. Well, I started out, I'm going to go way back. I started out in the corporate world, 15 years associate partner when I left with Accenture. It's now Accenture. It used to be called something else. We did big technology projects, right? Bank of America is one of my main clients, although I had a lot of different clients, but big projects. I realized about halfway in that I didn't have a passion for technology. I had more of a passion for the people that I was leading and training and mentoring. And I did actually go through some team building at Bank of America, who was my client. We had two managers. One was the client, Bank of America manager, and me. And we were running a team in a big project. And we were very, very different. And we were just struggling a little bit managing this team together, right? So we went through these two team building sessions. And by the way, we actually used an assessment that's based on the Big Five, and that's another story. But during that, we walked out of that second team building session best buddies. I mean, we understood each other. Then it was like, oh, well, you should do that because you're good at this, and I should do this. And it just, we were able to be so much more productive, and it was much more pleasant, right? So I was hooked at that point. I mean, I wanted to do that team building. So fast forward, I was climbing the ladder, making more money. I couldn't leave. My husband wouldn't let me leave at that point. So I finally got to leave. And even though that was a wonderful place, I lived in London for a couple of years. It was a great stint at Accenture. I have nothing bad to say about that. I went from a 60,000 person company to a 5-person company. Here in town, a couple that were married and business partners published a Big Five personality assessment. I ended up buying into that company, running the company. It became profitable. We got 24 distributors around the globe. In 2014, I sold my shares back to my partners, and I started Narrative. And Narrative partners with clients to improve communication, employee engagement, transform cultures. And we do that through leadership and team training, conflict management, coaching, and really consulting anything regarding talent or behavior in the workplace. We do use a lot of research-based assessments in our work, and I do, though, like to point out that those are just tools, right? The hard work is applying the information that comes out of it. And we have a proprietary assessment called the Narrative Big Five Personality Assessment. So that was do you want me to tell you about my kids and my,
Yeah, actually, I'm curious about a couple of things that you mentioned we sent for the audience. We send out a few questions to the guests beforehand to get at some of the personal things, because a lot of times I think that provides a lot of context. So there's actually a couple of things that I wanted to ask you about. Mm-hmm. I'm happy to let you go wherever you want with whatever you want to share. But two of the things that you mentioned that got me really curious was you mentioned that you like spending time with your 125-year-old Victorian house. And then you also mentioned watching your favorite crime shows. I'm curious about both of those. Tell me about this house, though, a 125-year-old Victorian house.
Yes. So it's in Uptown Charlotte. In Uptown Charlotte, there's a neighborhood called the Fourth Ward. And it's mostly Victorian houses that were actually in the 70s. Kind of some of them were moved in to create this. There were some that were already there. And it's been, in the 70s, it was kind of run down. And then people bought the homes and built, fix them up, et cetera. So there was a first wave in the 70s. Well, in 2000, my husband and I bought a house there, and that was kind of the second wave. And we raised our 3 children there. And it's been on the home tour 5 times. And the reason we do the home tour, we have like 2,000 people come through the house in a weekend. And
wow.
Everybody's like, why would you do that? And the reason we do it is because it forces us to kind of finish up those projects that we get ourselves into, and, to make. So, yeah. And we've done a lot of work to it. We've added about 1,600 square feet to what was there already.
Wow.
Over the years, because we've been there 22, 23 years now.
So part of the reason that I was curious about that is one of the reasons. So I moved to the Charlotte region from South Florida, and I made a list, like lots of people do, pros and cons, different areas. And one of the things that I loved about Charlotte was that in different areas, there's very different architecture. And in South Florida, with the exception of a few pockets, it's very, very homogeneous. It's a lot of stucco, concrete block construction, and tile roofs, and a lot of it is beautiful, but it's kind of same old, same old. And that Fourth Ward area is one of those little pockets. It's for those of you that are not in the Charlotte area. Uptown Charlotte is the city, like where the high rises, like Bank of America and Duke have their, huge high rise buildings, and then the Fourth Ward is kind of tucked very close to these. So it's kind of it seems to me like a pretty unique,
it's very unique
situation. Yeah.
Yes.
So you mentioned crime shows. I've had a few people, a few guests on with very interesting backgrounds. 2 of them were Army interrogators for 20 years.
Oh, wow.
So I've gotten really, really fascinated with behavior analysis and body language because those 2 guests, that's their expertise, right? And when I started talking to them and consuming some of the content they put out, I realized that a lot of what they do and what they teach is very applicable in every area of our life, because they learn certain skills and they use those skills in a certain context in the military. But those skills are really about observing what they call people's baselines, right? Their natural behavior, and that kind of leads into the assessments as well. And then in their jobs as interrogators or in intelligence, what they were looking for is deviations from the baseline, right? And then there's all kinds of things that could lead to, right? It may ask, it may not answer something, it may not tell them that a piece of information they need, but it might tip them off that they might be giving me a piece of information to be deceptive. But the real question I have is, why are they being deceptive? Right. So tell me about, what are some of your favorite crime shows?
Okay, I'm going to tell you, but a couple of things that brought to my mind was, I am so good at predicting what's going to happen. My family is like, you've got to be kidding me. Like I say, oh, well, I think blah, blah, blah. And then it'll happen. And they're somewhat amazed. And I imagine it's something about that, right? Because I do observe human behavior every day. That's what my expertise is in understanding why people do what they do, right? Although nobody can really know. There's so much that goes into that. But my favorite crime shows, I have such a bad memory. I just bring up the last one that I've been watching. So I watch a lot of British crime shows. So I watched Vera, which is Brenda Blevins. You might not remember her, but she's a famous actress from a long time ago. And she's like this older, stodgy lady, but very much, her own person. And she's in England, and there's murders, and she goes out and investigates, but it's all about the character. Like her as a character is just so interesting. I do watch some of the other stuff, like just the escapism of like SWAT or SEAL Team or, things like that. Oh, I loved Bosch. Yes. And Bosch Legacy. There's a second one.
Oh, is there?
You know that? Yes.
I binged some of it and then I forget. I don't know if I discovered a new show or somehow I got off track. So I haven't seen all of them, but I like that. There's something about Bosch that's a little bit different. I think it's, his character is kind of this he's kind of old school. He kind of doesn't fit in, but he's got certain skills that other people don't have. Something you said actually reminded me. One of the guys that I had on, Greg Hartley, he was an Army interrogator for 20 years. And I asked him a question, which was that when I watched, so he has, with three partners in crime, they have a YouTube channel called The Behavior Panel, right? Which I stumbled across about a year ago. And what they do is they show little snippets, usually maybe 15 seconds long. Typically, like recently would be a good example, the Murdaugh trials, right?
Oh, yeah.
They'll show a little snippet of him in court, and then they'll freeze it. And the four guys will give commentary on what they see and what they observe, right? Then they'll play it back again. And the question I asked Greg was, the first time I saw that, and I watched the clip the second time after they explained what they saw, I was like, this is insane. It's like watching a magic trick.
Yeah.
Right. And I asked him, I said, you guys ever get that comment? He goes, all the time. So it sounds like the feedback you're getting from your family is, how did you do that? To them, it seems like magic because they don't see what you see.
Right.
So I think that's a good lead into assessments, because they're kind of a sort of more refined way of getting to some of the behavior experts. They talk about baselines. They typically are getting to somebody's baseline by observation, but assessments help people do that much quicker and more scientifically. So I know you use the Big Five. And before we jump into that, can you touch on just real quick, Big Five versus Hexaco? I've not read a lot, but there's one other piece that Hexaco uses that Big Five doesn't. Are you familiar with Hexaco at all?
I'm not familiar with Hexaco. That's interesting.
Okay.
I thought I've heard all of them. I thought I'd heard all of them. So I've been doing this over 20 years.
From what little I've read, Hexaco just adds one. It basically is based on the Big Five, but it adds one extra aspect of personality.
Right. Got it.
Tell us about the Big Five and why, and maybe for some context. Most of my audience is probably in the finance and accounting space, so they all would have heard of Accenture and are familiar with that company. For those of you that are not familiar, for Accenture, for a little more context, they're one of the biggest consulting firms on the planet and have been for a very, very long time. So when I was graduating from college, I wanted to work for one of the big four CPA firms. If you wanted to go into management consulting, Accenture was one of those that people really, really wanted to work at. So I'm saying that for context because I imagine working there, you probably did a lot of things that were very, very based on science and metrics and things that were measurable.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about the Big Five and why you chose to specialize in the Big Five versus all the other ones.
So, well, I'll tell you, it was sort of happenstance that I found a company in town that published an assessment that was different than, and so there was kind of happenstance, but the reality is that it is the standard for psychologists and academics. So now that if people haven't heard of the Big Five, now that you've heard of it, it's called the Big Five or the 5-factor model of personality. If you read a Harvard Business Review, if you read a Fast Company, and they're talking about personality, that 95% of the time they're going to talk about the Big Five, and they will even talk about it being the standard now. The Big Five goes deeper than most other assessments. It shows your scores on a spectrum, which I really love because we're not introverted or extroverted. We're somewhere on the extroversion spectrum. It avoids that labeling and narrowing us down to one or two letters or words or numbers, right? So while those assessments have their place, especially if you only have a short period of time and you want to quickly talk about differences, they have their place. But this is kind of a next generation if you want to go deeper. And so it has this particular assessment based on the 5-factor model. There's multiple assessments based on it. This one, the narrative Big Five, has the 5 super traits and then 23 sub traits. You could have 15 sub traits, you could have 30, right? But this one has 23. So that's quite a few things to be very specific about.
Yep. So I thought it might be interesting. I shouldn't say you did an assessment. I did the assessment, right? So when you do the Big Five assessment, it's not somebody else observing you and deciding you're this or you're that. You actually go through questions, right? And then it produces a report that is shockingly insightful. When I looked at it, I thought, how in the world could they know that much that I feel is accurate, that jives with my own perception of how I am in these certain areas, just from a what to me seems like a pretty small amount of questions they ask you. And so we talked about this beforehand, and I sent you a copy of my Big Five that I completed because it's been a while. I didn't want you to have to go chase it down. But you mentioned that you would kind of look back through it, and there were some things that you thought were interesting. And part of the reason I want to do this for the audience is I'm a big fan of showing rather than telling.
Right.
So I thought if they could see how you're using this assessment to have a conversation with me and how we're using it, I think that would be helpful. So tell me some of the things that you saw in mine that kind of jumped out at you.
Yeah. So, when I sit down with someone, I never send a report without sitting down with them. I have 20 years of experience with what does this all mean? And there's no way I could put all that in a report, right? So a couple of things that stood out to me when I was looking at your assessment again. And so I'm going to kind of jump around a little bit, but from a resilience standpoint, you're very optimistic and composed. So you're very positive, calm, so you have that calming, positive influence on people when they meet you, when they're working with you. But you do worry and you can get irritated, right? And so those are a little bit different in each other. That just means you're complex when it comes to resilience. So resilience, as we define it, is how you deal with stress. So even though worrying sometimes and getting a little irritated, it can cause stress. The good parts about that are it means you care and you probably are passionate about things, right? So, but the challenge, the downside is it's not fun sometimes to have that stress. And then you have those optimism and that composure to where most people probably don't realize that you are worrying, right?
It's funny when you were saying that, what came to my mind is when I've had deeper conversations with people and they realize how optimistic I am, sometimes they don't realize that I'm optimistic because externally, I think I tend to focus more on protecting the downside, right? And so I'd be curious what your thoughts are on the nature nurture thing, right? Because I come from an accounting background, and in accounting, even when you're in school, they teach professional skepticism, right? And in some accountants' jobs, in some of the roles I had professionally, part of my job was find the gotchas in this deal that we're looking at, this business unit or whatever, so that you can point them out and help us protect the downside or develop contingency plans. So what are your thoughts on the nature nurture aspect of that?
Yeah. So the twin studies that have been done tell us that, and it's not that debated anymore, that about 60% of our personality we're born with, and about 40% is environment. Now, some places like the Center for Creative Leadership, they'll do 50-50. They'll say 50-50 just to be very conservative. The reality is it's probably more than 60. That's nature.
So when you say, sorry to interrupt, but when you say twin studies, they've actually studied with identical twins?
Yes, and where they were raised in different environments.
Okay.
And the thing that I want to make sure, though, to point out is that 60% doesn't mean that you are predestined to behave a certain way. What it means is you've been given this raw material. What you do with that raw material
That's how you are kind of out of the womb without any external.
Right. And also let's just give an example. Somebody that worries a lot, one person realizes I've got to do aerobic exercise. I mean, some people, you know how it's like, if I don't run every day, I just can't function, sort of thing. Right. So some people, because they worry, they have figured out, I need to do the aerobic exercise to get the toxins out of my body. Some people may eat more comfort foods as their reaction to having that stress and anxiety, right? So again, I just want to make sure that 60% is genetic, but what you do with that genetic raw material is up to you. But anyway, getting back to what you were talking about, I think a couple things that are really interesting about that are, yes, your environment, your training is part of that 40%. You were trained to say, I got to look at the things that can go wrong in a situation, and then I we can deal with them, right? Generally, a less optimistic person, it's going to come more naturally for them to think of those things that are going to go wrong. It's just going to come more naturally.
For a more optimistic person?
No, a less optimistic.
Oh, okay.
A less optimistic person.
That makes sense.
But I will also point out on your assessment, when you bring that up, you are skeptical. You have a very skeptical trait, right?
Yep.
Or we call it, your trust trait is very low. So
I might even use the word jaded in certain contexts for certain things, not everything.
Well, and see, when I see a 2.8, I can kind of, it's almost like I'm reading your palm, because I can pretty much guarantee that what I'm going to say about it is true, right?
Yeah, this is the stuff, by the way, for those of you watching and listening, that looks like magic when you don't understand all the science behind it.
And so a lot of times it's a combination of things. So you picked up on it on the optimism, but I would have said, yes, someone who is more pessimistic would be thinking of those things more naturally, like it would just come to them all the time. And sometimes those people, we think, oh, they're negative, right? Especially if we're really positive and optimistic. Oh, why do they always have to be negative? But we need those people for system testing, risk management, just like what you said, accounting. So I looked at, look at that combination of skepticism that was somewhat what you were talking about too.
Yeah. So,
am I going to point out some more things?
Sure, but I just wanted to comment. So give some examples so that to give some people some food for thought. So places where I see my nature coming out all the time, almost uncontrollably, is I see typos and stuff almost I don't even look for them. I've had several people that, like, I met them in networking and I go to their LinkedIn profile and a typo just jumps out at me. And I'll message them and say, hey, just FYI, I saw this typo. And almost every time they've been like, oh, that's been there for years. I didn't even, and I'm like, I swear to you, I'm not looking for it. It just jumps out. So that I see that sort of in my nature. The flip side of that, to address what you were talking about, where we're not stuck in what nature tells us in that 60%, right? So I would self-identify as being more introverted than extroverted. And that I talk for a living, right? I've spoken to groups of hundreds of people, and people might say, well, how are you an introverted, but you do that? Well, over the years, I started out by being situationally extroverted out of necessity, just because of different jobs that I had. And then just through repetition and then, working on it consciously, I got more comfortable with it, right? So for any of you that say, well, gosh, if 60%, I'm out of the box like this, what do I do? You can work on all that stuff if you choose to. It doesn't mean you have to change it. It doesn't mean you're stuck with it. You kind of get to do what you want with it. What the assessment tells you is out of the box. If nobody kind of did anything from your environment, that's kind of more what it's telling you, right?
Well, it's telling you a little bit of a combination of both, right? Because at the point that you're taking the assessment, you've had a long history, well, depending on how old you are, of that environment influencing it. So I can't tease out of the score what is genetic and what is environment, right?
So that brings up an interesting point, which I'm curious about. What are your thoughts on people's ability to game the assessment?
Okay. I'm going to answer that question, I promise, but I do want to go back to something you said, because you're in the top 20% of people who are perfectionists. So they're 80% of the working adult population is less perfectionistic than you. So when you tell me that the typos, I can see that, right? It just comes to it's easy for you. The other point I wanted to make is that we can behave anywhere we want to. On the spectrum, we have a score on each of the spectrums, right? But if you're an introvert, sometimes you have to do extroverted activity, right? You need to, if you're a business owner, you got to go to networking, and you can do that. It just means you just don't want to do it every night, and it doesn't give you a bunch of energy. It drains you a little bit more, but you certainly can do it, right? So just to your point. Okay, you were asking me about gaming the assessment. You can game the assessment. You are answering these questions, right? There is not there's nothing that will tell me for certain whether you are gaming the assessment, whether you're trying to make it you look good or whatever. But I will tell you, I've added to this assessment, I've added about 20 questions. There's actually a name for these questions that was developed by research of what you should ask people, and put that in the assessment, which basically says there's probably a chance that this person is trying to look good, right? And having worked with these for 22 years, I can look at an assessment and say, I don't think this could be. And then I go and actually ask questions of the person. And I actually did this with someone where I was using it for a selection. And we
like
actually had to go back and I went and talked to him. I asked really specific questions to see how true it was, So yes, I have to make sure, but I will tell you that that only happens every once in a while, right? Mostly people answer the way they.
When you said you're in the top 20%, my instinct was to go, yay. And then when you said of perfectionists, and I thought, I immediately thought of this guy, Alex Hormozy. He's a super successful business guy. His business does like $200 million a year in revenue. He does a lot of stuff in social media. And he said one time, perfectionism is just procrastination dressed up as quality control. And when I heard that, I went, oh, dude, I am guilty of procrastination.
Yes, I can see that.
And I think when I heard that quote, I thought, I think that's what I'm doing a lot of times, is that I'm calling it perfectionism, but in reality, it not always, but in reality, sometimes maybe that's like an excuse to put off doing the thing. Or, for example, I'm working on a project. I have to draft a document, a PowerPoint or whatever, and it takes longer than it should. And I'm calling that perfectionism. But at the end of the day, I'm kind of just not finishing.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I would put that a little bit different way.
Okay.
I would say that your perfectionism score exacerbates your tendency to procrastinate. So you already have a tendency to procrastinate. You're in kind of 50% of the population on that. So
why do I procrastinate?
So
not affected by the perfectionists. What would the assessment tell you?
The perfectionism is separate but related. It's all related to some point, but it is within the same super trait, conscientiousness. So it correlates more. They correlate more together, right? So we call it self-discipline. That's about procrastination and perfectionism. But that perfectionism is almost causing some. It's hard to say how much of it is that's why you're procrastinating, or is it making it even harder? Right? Like you already have that tendency to procrastinate and it's giving you more excuse, like you said, to do it. So but you can be a procrastinator and not be a perfectionist at all. Right? So I'm curious. It's that spectrum. You can be all over the place.
Do psychologists or psychiatrists have all, I shouldn't ask all. Is it common that they would have a patient who comes to them, take this assessment, like before they start working with them, so they can kind of get that background that the assessment gives them?
Yes. Now, if they were a therapist or psychiatrist, they would use the NEO-PIR because it's the standard clinical Big Five assessment. It would not. The questions on our assessment are about work. The assessments at the NEO-PIR is the standard Big Five. It was the first one. It was used in a clinical setting. So those questions are just more about life in general and maybe some work, but yeah. But yes.
So there's different versions of the Big Five, but the undergirding science is the same for all of them. It sounds to me like what you're saying is over the years, people have kind of tweaked the base Big Five assessment to be more useful in different settings.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
So like, for example, I've seen people may be familiar with DISC assessments, and I've seen like DISC for sales, DISC for manager, things like that. Just something along those lines.
A little bit like that. Yeah.
A little bit. Okay. All right. So that's conscientiousness. Anything else? I mean, I don't want to
Oh,
spend
that
the
I
whole
want to,
time
I
just getting
did. No, I
therapy
did
here,
want to
but
just point out, which I just think it's so interesting that you're in 10% of the population of people who have a high imagination, who like ideas, who get really excited about coming up with new ideas, right? And you're also in and I say top 10%, it doesn't, top and bottom don't mean anything except along the spectrum. It's not good or bad.
it's just a distribution.
It's just different. So
like the bell
people,
curve kind of.
yeah, people on the opposite end of ideas and high imagination are the doers, the implementers. And we certainly need those. And that's great too, right? It's just different. And
This
then
explains a lot.
and then the people in the middle are the ones that translate between people like you that have all the ideas to the people that can actually make them happen. Right. So what were you going to say? So anyway,
Well,
I just think
ask.
that's interesting because you start out as accounting. And I guess in accounting, you certainly can have ideas, but they're not going to necessarily be pie in the sky ideas. So tell me about that. You tell me about that.
I joke with people all the time that creative people in accounting are usually the ones that end up in jail. We have a term for creativity in accounting. It's called Betty Crocker accounting, cooking the books, right? People like the Jeff Skillings I shouldn't say Jeff Skillings. I think he might be out of jail now, but the folks that were involved in Enron, right? So for my accounting and finance folks, remember Arthur Andersen? Arthur Andersen used to be as prestigious as Accenture, right? When I was graduating college, they were one of the big four CPA firms that all us accounting students were like fighting to get jobs at. They were the biggest, most prestigious firms in the world. Mm-hmm. And Arthur Andersen doesn't exist anymore because some of the people within Arthur Andersen, it wasn't the whole firm, but some of the people at the top were involved in being a little bit too creative with their accounting.
Yes. Yes.
So the comment that I made is when I said that explains a lot, is you were saying that the people who are higher on creativity tend to be lower on implementation.
Right.
Right. So that leads me to a question, which is probably a big area where you use this or could use this to help people, which is knowing what we know just from what we've discussed. How could I use that in my business? To me, what jumps to mind is, okay, get an assistant, which I finally did after years and years of people telling me, get an assistant. I found that very helpful. But now I'm finding out I have an assistant who only does tasks that I give her. I've recently have met another person that does virtual assistant work and realized this other person does more. They'll help you figure out areas that maybe they could help take things off your plate. This other assistant is just give me the list of tasks and I'll do them. Right. All that other stuff, that's above my pay grade. Right.
Yeah.
Now I'm realizing maybe it would make sense for me to pay more for that person that says, let me see the things that are sucking your time.
Yeah.
And then I can help you strategize on how I can help you get more organized, stay more organized, so that you can just focus on the things that this big five might tell me those are your strengths.
Right.
Focus on those. So how could we use this to help me steer to become a better business person?
Okay, so we could talk about this all day long. I'm so passionate about this because it's so true. When you talk about that, people who score low on the imagination, they are the doers, but they also need more direction. You have to tell them to do A, B, C. You have to tell them, you can't just say, I need a status report. You have to tell them the format. Make it a one page. At the top, you need accomplishments last week, at the bottom, So what happened, and someone like you doesn't want to do that and maybe find it hard to do that, right? You just want to say, I need a status report, and you want someone to go do it. Well, the person that you're talking about, I would look at the other traits as well, but let's just talk about imagination, just that subtrait. They probably are more in the middle, and they're doing that translating. They can have the ideas. Obviously, anyone can have the ideas. Don't get me wrong. Generally, people who score lower have more practical ideas. But the person in the middle is the translator. And because you're so high, if I was hiring someone for you, I would hire someone that's in the middle, because you want them to complement you and give you what you need that you don't have. But you also don't want them to be so far away from you that you butt heads and you can't it's hard to communicate.
Yeah. Interesting. So this actually,
so I can use it for selection. I use it for selection. What I do is I profile the job, and then I do that.
this is a big area where I think, and this is part of why I wanted to say, you know what, I'm okay using my assessment as an example, because this whole thing of showing rather than telling, right?
Yeah.
I often have oftentimes have trouble getting people to understand what I do because of that curse of knowledge, right? I tell them I develop and deliver training primarily in the area of communication skills, and I mostly work with accounting and finance professionals. That sounds really clear to me, but most people actually, they don't have a clue what the heck that actually means. So that's why I thought if we actually go through a couple of things in my assessment, we talk about, well, so what, right? Now what do I do about these things? It gives people a better understanding. But this also led me to another question, which is something in your, not profile, not your big five profile, but just in your overall profile, which I found interesting, which is the fact that you got an associate's degree in fine arts, but then you got a bachelor's degree in math, which to me are like opposite ends of the spectrum, kind of like me with accounting, and now I do speaking sometimes. What was the thinking there to go from art to math, and now you work with people? Like how?
Yeah. So I always sang. I love to sing, and I'm pretty good. Now I basically sing at Christmas and retirement homes. But I was a music major. I was excited to be a music major. I figured out, and I went to a small school that was a music school before I went to Chapel Hill for math. So, but I realized as I was doing that I couldn't go to the Metropolitan Opera. I'm very driven, right? That's one of my traits. And so if I couldn't do something big, I didn't want to do it at all, right? So I didn't want to be a music teacher in a small town in North Carolina, right? There's nothing wrong with that. It just wasn't what I wanted to do, right? I wanted to be on stage. So now I'm on stage speaking instead and training. But there is from a science perspective in the brain, there is a correlation between the theory of music and math, right? So it's not as far off as you think. But I was always good at math. And so, our generation, my generation, your family had a big influence on you, or people had a big influence on what you went and did. So because I was really good at math, my dad kind of pushed me into it, and it was like, okay, well, I'm good at it, so I should do it. But I'm so extroverted. When I got out of school, I knew I didn't want to sit in a desk, writing formulas or coding, which was the thing, right? I did. So I went so I found Accenture, which, by the way, actually started out as part of Arthur Andersen. It was Andersen Consulting. And anyway, but we broke off. So I went to a company that I knew I was going to get to travel. I was going to get to go to different projects all the time. I was going to have different clients. I wasn't going to be sitting at a desk. We start out programming. We do at Accenture back then, the consulting, we started out programming, and then you become a designer, and then you manage programmers, et cetera. So you move up pretty quickly. And so then when I got into all that technology, it was great because I did get to travel. I got to meet a lot of different clients, loved what I did. And we did big things. I liked that. But I didn't have that passion for technology. Because I'm so extroverted, I was so much more engaged with the people side. Then that's when I did that switch. So what's great is that students now have these assessments that can help them determine where their natural strengths are, so that they can figure out sooner some of the things they're interested in, or that they'll find passion with.
Until you made that connection between music and math, I was kind of curious. It actually makes sense when you said there's a lot of music is kind of a lot of math, right? And I think I don't remember who I heard say it, but something along the lines of everything really boils down to math, that you can find relationships and everything. And I've always said, when I hear people say, well, why do we make kids take so much math that they're never going to use it again? And my first thought is always, I use algebra almost every single day of my life, even if I'm not doing math. Because if you think about what algebra is, just the most basic ideas in algebra, it's like analogies. This is to this, X is to Y, as Y is to Z, right? It's all about so if this goes up, what happens to this over here, right? And you don't have to calculate anything. You don't have to actually even be thinking about math, but by learning the concepts of algebra, and then I think the actual doing the math, doing the problems reinforces the relationships and the ideas, so that later on, like now, I don't work with numbers anymore, but I still feel like I use algebra because I'm always looking at the way people learn, right? Okay, how does this relate to something I already understand? And how is it different? That's kind of algebraic ideas at the like highest level, like pie in the sky. Maybe this is that trait of mine, the creativity coming out. I'm finding. Would that explain, by the way, why sometimes somebody will say something and it will trigger something in my brain and I'll go off on a tangent. And to me, it makes total sense. And they're going, what made you think of that? Is that creativity piece?
Okay, so that's another piece that's in the same super trait as imagination. It's called complexity. And you're also 10% in that one. And just that explanation that you just talked about things that related and everything, and that explains that you are high in that. And this is the example that you just gave me is what I give all the time to people talking about complexity. You see connections that other people do not see. A lot of other people don't see. Other people might, on the other end of the spectrum, look at an issue really narrowly and simply. And so if they're looking at an issue really narrowly and simply, and you get a connection and you voice it, they're going,
they think,
how does that have to do with what I'm doing, right?
Yeah.
What I'm talking about. And I teach people you need to communicate when this happens. Don't shut him off because you think he's off topic. Ask him, how did you get there, right? So this is how I work with teams.
Yeah, so this brings up something interesting is when you say top 10%, everyone, and again, we're talking about, I'm assuming like on a bell curve, right? It's distribution.
Yeah.
So it's not better, it's not worse, it just is. It's just where you are on this curve. Like most things, when you tend to be towards any extreme, it comes as a blessing and a curse, because I see all the time when I'm working on developing a new course, I get these ideas that seem all over the place. I put them on paper, I put them in the PowerPoint, I leave them and I come back and realize, oh, no one's going to understand why I'm using this example. And I'll bounce it off other people. So it can be really good if you understand how to harness it.
Right.
But it can be challenging in those in the moment conversations when you just get an idea that sparks and you voice it and it leaves other people going, where? I've told people this before, that I can only imagine that people who are super intelligent, it must be a struggle for them to have conversations with people who are not super intelligent, because I have to imagine that what they think about and the way they think is very different, right? It's part of what makes them exceptional in intelligence. And I just have to imagine it must be a struggle to talk to average intelligence people, because they're just thinking about different things all the time.
Yeah. And when you
it must be that way with everything, though, right? With the extremes.
Exactly. Yes, it is. And that where there's large difference, that's where there's room for conflict, because you're looking at things so differently. And that's where I come in and help with lowering that tension, helping them to start communicating more, and helping them understand each other. So what's so interesting is that if you were talking to somebody that thinks like you, that scores high on complexity, right, then you would click more, right? They would get your connection. Right. They'd get it right then. So that's when you get really comfortable when you find somebody like that, right?
Yeah. And I think this is why when we talk about generalizations, right? So in some of the courses that I teach, I talk about cross-cultural communication, right? And we'll talk about different generalizations about different cultures. And I always start the conversation with, we're talking about generalizations here. We want to be very careful not to go down that slippery slope to stereotypes, right? And the difference, to me, the easiest way I found to describe it is, if we use this information, what we know about groups as a starting point to understanding, it's useful. When we start to assume that everybody who displays some trait now has all those other traits because they're part of that group, that's
Right.
where we get ourselves into trouble.
Yeah.
But it makes me wonder.
We do that
if
with generations. We do that.
we do
That's
that
an
with-
issue
oh,
with generations for sure.
It's funny you mentioned generations. That's the area where I've seen the most drastic differences where there's a disconnect. So, for example, I'm talking about this exact topic, and we start talking about generational differences, and someone older, like in my age cohort or older, makes a comment like, those darn millennials. And then they start bad mouthing millennials. And I'm going, dude, look to your left and to your right. We have a room full of millennials and people from all kinds of different groups.
Yes.
But what I found fascinating is people like, I'm in my mid 50s, people like in my age group and older seem to not think twice before commenting about other age groups. Whereas especially the younger age cohorts are much more aware and thoughtful. This is just my observation.
Right.
It's not scientific study.
Yeah.
I'm saying.
Yeah.
My personal observation, but thousands of people that I've seen in not all at one time, but in different courses that I've been involved with, they seem to be a lot more aware. And I'm just, my guess is that, it has a lot to do with their generation growing up.
Inclusion.
It was a very different experience for them. And our culture has changed a lot. We have a lot of things where I even have difficulty in my classes sometimes, where I'm trying to teach the platinum rule. Do unto others as they want done unto them, not as you want done unto you. We learned the golden rule when I was a kid.
Right.
Do unto others as you would like done unto yourself. Well, guess what? Everyone doesn't like what I like. And I think that points to, in my opinion, what is the great value of things like clubs and affinity groups, right? To be with those people that you're very much like, so that you can explore those things. I'll give you a perfect example. Me and my girlfriend, she's extremely extroverted. She's a special education teacher. I did substitute teaching for about a year on and off before I moved to North Carolina. And I realized I can't do that job because I don't have the patience and I'm not understanding enough to be as empathetic as I need to be to do that job properly. And for her, it's like a great fit. But I think it's good to spend time with people you're very different from, but also have some time for yourself where you go, my people, where you can relax, be yourself, not have to do the platinum rule thing. Because I get this all the time. People will say, you mean to tell me I got 10 different people that I manage? You mean to tell me I have to talk differently to all 10 of them?
Yes.
No. Well, what I tell them is, no, you don't have to.
Yeah.
Only if you want to be more effective.
Right.
Right? You
And
don't
if
have
you want
to do anything.
And if you want to get the most out of them.
Right. And sometimes they get upset about it and, I have to talk them down a little bit. But my message to them is, look, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to be here in this class, right? You could walk out and say, this guy, John, is so full of crap. He doesn't know what he's saying. You could do that. I'm trying to share with you things that are based in science and or things that I've seen work over and over again in similar circumstances. Take that for what it's worth. Some of them, I will tell you, like a big five, right? I could point to the science behind the big five, right? And you could talk obviously in a lot more detail about that, but it's based in hard science and it's been studied over and over and over and over again. So you can argue with it, but it's backed by science. So I feel pretty comfortable saying, here's the science. When it's something where I don't know if there's any science behind it, I'm very clear. Look, when I worked here, I did this. It was effective. It worked for me. It may or may not work for you. I'm just sharing that with you. Right?
Yeah.
It might be helpful. It might not. One of the guests that I've had on, Mark Bowden, once said, all models are wrong, but some are useful. And what I took from that is take the best and leave the rest. Whatever lesson you could take out of it, even if I've learned things from people I disagree with, but I've learned something from them. And I thought, okay, I could take that and use it. I might have to change it a little bit or tweak it, but I can use that. So that I have a question now. A lot of what we just talked about leads me to this. And I gave you that example. My girlfriend and I are very opposite. introvert, extrovert. I'm super, super literal with my language. She's much more, she uses a lot of vague language, right? That causes problems. What are your thoughts and what does the science say about this whole opposites attracting, and what are things that people who are opposite in relationships can do at kind of a high level to help manage those relationships?
Yes. So the science says that longer term relationships are more probable the more similar you are, because it's easier, right? It's easier. But it doesn't mean, and opposites do tend to attract. I don't know a lot about the research about why that is, but I think some of it has, like you just said, this is not scientific, but my hypothesis is that we see in other people what we don't, that is different than us, that we might be attracted to, and we might want. Like, I'm not very adventurous. I'm very serious. I'm very work oriented. My husband is an adventure, free spirit. And that's what I was attracted to. And because I wanted to be more like him. He gets mad because he's like, you just made me more like you. He gets upset because he says, I just made him more like me. But
that jives with my theory as well.
Yeah.
All the things you're saying, when I think about the things I love about my girlfriend that are super different from me, that's what attracted me. Is I want to explore more of that. I like that, but I'm not like that as much as I'd like to be. But then
over time,
work long term.
Right. And over time, those things can upset you because it's different than the way you want to do things. Right. But that's where, if you understand it, if you communicate about it, if you, we know that, John, you like ideas, and or maybe you, I don't know if you like change. You're in the middle on change, but someone that likes change wants to go to different restaurants all the time, try new different things. Someone that's low on change, they want to go to the same two restaurants, get one of two different meals, right? So you have to compromise it, and that means communication, right? So what it means is, what you have to continually do is remember what to appreciate about the other person and what they're bringing to the relationship. And that's the same thing I do with people at work, the teams, is I'm trying to get the frustration to come down and say, hey, instead of being frustrated with negative Nelly over there who keeps saying, what about this and what about that? Appreciate him for what he's bringing to the table. He's keeping your team from doing things that might risk this customer or risk this business or whatever, right? So that's a lot of what I do with teams.
So this brings up something that I think is also, it's been helpful for me. It took me a while to realize this, is that sometimes when you're seeking advice, it's critical that you understand context, right? So if you ask, for example, you go to some couple that's been married for 30, 40 years, and you say, what's the secret? You've been married all these years. You seem so happy. What's the secret? And one couple might say, I don't know what to tell you. It's really pretty easy. We like the same stuff, and, we've just always gotten along. It's easy to talk about anything and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I don't know what to tell you. It's just easy. You should look for someone where it's just easy. You talk to someone else and they go, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. You got to work on it all the time. And you think, I don't understand. They're both married a long time. This is like opposite. Well, maybe it's because the first couple were both very alike. So they had a lot in common. They didn't struggle to communicate. It's very easy conversation. The second couple were maybe opposite, and that's what attracted them. And over time, they realized those things that we love sometimes cause communication issues, but they realized it was worth working on it because of how it enriched their lives. So neither one of them is wrong.
Right. Yeah.
It pays to understand their context. And if you, sometimes it's a blind spot, right? We don't know what we don't know.
Right.
I might not think to ask, are you guys both really similar? And if they don't just happen to mention things that make that obvious, that could be very confusing. And I found that with observing business people and saying, okay, this person just talked for an hour and I took notes and he said this list of things. And then I go to another seminar or whatever it is. I listen to someone else very successful. I take notes and I look at them and I'm going, they said opposite things. And I used to struggle and go, how do I reconcile this? sometimes you don't.
Right. Two things
Sometimes,
can be true at the same time.
yes.
I've learned that.
Yeah, that's been a difficult lesson
Yes.
for
It's
me to learn,
messy.
so I have a question that I just came up with this. I didn't come up with this. I heard somebody else talking about this on a podcast. And I thought it'd be an interesting question to ask you. This guy, Alex Hormozy, very successful businessman, the interviewer in the podcast asked him something about, what do you think so-and-so should, blah, blah, blah. And he said, I wish I could get rid of the word should.
Mhm.
And he basically just pontificated about how he hates the word should. And he's like, too many people are out there saying you should this or I should. People say should to themselves all the time.
Oh, all the time. Yeah.
Tony Robbins kind of semi jokes about people should all over themselves, right?
Mhm.
What are your thoughts on the word should? And do you think it's something that's helpful, that should be abolished? What do you think?
Oh, yes. So that's coming from someone that has a lot of shoulds. And I don't know, 20 years ago, started hearing, and it was in the therapy. I've gone to therapy off and on throughout my life, and it was a therapist that said, "Stop saying should. Who said you should? Who said?
Probably our
You,
parents a lot,
yeah,
for
you
starters.
you have control over this, right?" And so I think, oh my goodness, I think it's a huge topic. But what I'll tell you is that I think there are certain personalities that are more likely to think they should do things, right? I think telling the shoulds to yourself is worse than anything. I mean, there's
Okay.
all that's I'm always giving advice, but I'm always saying, hey, take it or leave it. I'm going to tell you kind of what you said. I'm going to tell you from my experience, but it may or may not work for you, right? But I'm going to tell you. But yes. So people who are high in conscientiousness, who are really high in conscientiousness, perfectionist, organized, disciplined, those people I think have a lot of shoulds because internally, because they have very high expectations of themselves. And they also have very high expectations of others. And so I'm working with someone right now, coaching them, that she's brilliant, amazing at what she does. And she has such high expectations of herself, but she also puts those expectations on everybody else, and nobody can live up to them.
Yeah, you hit on a couple of things that kind of hit home for me. One of the things I want to ask this question, though, you mentioned a series of traits, some of which resonated with me, some of did not. So you said people that are high in conscientiousness. One of the couple of terms you said were organized and disciplined.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if the assessment would tell you that I am those, because I feel like I am conscientious, but I don't think I'm naturally organized. It's a conundrum for me.
Mm-hmm.
I like everything to be organized, but I hate organizing.
Yes. So
right?
you're on conscientiousness. We talked a little bit about your procrastination. So you're in 50% of the population on procrastination. You're also in 50% of the working adult population in organization. So you're just in the middle, right? You probably would like to be a little more organized.
Well, same with discipline.
But you are high on drive and you're high on perfectionism. So those two are also in conscientiousness, right? And drive is a powerful trait, I will tell you. And it will make up for other challenges. It overrides other challenges a lot.
That's one thing that I'm thankful that there are so many people. For number one, I'm thankful for podcasts, and there are so many people that are out there that I have heard their stories and learned about their backgrounds and their success stories that you never see on regular television, just because there's more of them out there. There's like millions of podcasts, right? And that seems to be a fairly common thread with all of them. I can't count the number of times I've heard somebody say, look, I'm not the smartest guy in the world. I just work really hard. Tom Bilyeu is famous for saying, I'm below average intelligence. Like, I know it. But I have an insane ability to endure suffering. right?
Yeah.
He's like, that's
Mhm.
my calling card. He's
Yeah.
like, I can outwork, outsuffer. He's like, I'll challenge. Nobody will outsuffer me. And he's, very, very wealthy, very
Mhm. Mhm.
successful. But if you listen to his story, he even like with his personal fitness, he was saying that the way he used to be overweight and he lost weight by basically just starving himself, right? Just cutting his calories and working out a lot. And he was
Mhm.
talking to some guy that was a nutrition expert, and he goes, I wish I had known what you're telling me now, because I did it by just sucking it up. You're telling me
Yeah.
there's an easier way to it, but
Right. Right.
sucking it up will work also. So the ability to endure the suck, as military people say, can make up for a lot.
Yes. And the thing about, behavior and what I deal with all the time is we are complex. People are really complex. And even though I do talk about personality, I also talk about motivations. I look them at and generational, which is totally different because it's not specific to the person. But I look at it as layers that all come together to make up why we do what we do. Right. And so even though I'll tell you that you're more naturally somebody, let me just say I'm talking to someone else and I say, you're naturally an introvert. But that introvert, if they are motivated to do with a great idea or what they're passionate about, you wouldn't believe how extroverted they would act if it's about getting to that goal, if it's about making that idea known. It all comes together. And again, you can flex depending on what your goal is and how driven you are and all that. Yeah. It's fascinating.
The example that I give people sometimes, because I talk to a lot of accounting and finance folks, and a huge proportion of them will self-identify as introverts. And I tell them all the time, look, one of the first things I talk about often in workshops is, what are your goals? What are your communication goals, right? I'm going to do some training on communication. What are your goals? Because you may have zero desire to be a public speaker, right? I speak in front of hundreds of people all the time. I used to be so introverted, my face would literally twitch in certain situations. And I think sometimes people think I'm making it up because it makes a good story. I'm not. It's absolutely true. You can ask people that knew me 20 years ago. I would get up in front of a room of like 10 people to deliver some training or something, and my face would be twitching. I had somebody come up like, are you okay? And now I go up in front of two, and I've done this before where I've had stuff where the power goes out, or, all kinds of crazy stuff happen.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not because I was born like this natural outgoing speaker. It was exactly what you said. At some point in my career, I observed there were lots of people who were not more technically competent at their job than some of the people, and they got promoted above them. They got the cool projects.
Mm-hmm.
They got moved to different roles, or they got other jobs. I have gotten jobs that I think on paper I was not the best qualified for, because I figured out I got to be more that, fill in the blank, whatever that is.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times that was something extroverted. If I want to get the things that I want, I need to have more of those traits. I'm just going to figure it out. And in the beginning, I didn't have a plan of how to do it. I just stumbled through. And I tell people all the time, one of the things I try to do with my training is help people not stumble through all the trial and error that I went through, and try to give them training that's a lot more digestible, a lot easier for them to learn quickly, remember, and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
I want to respect your time, and we're getting close to the top of the hour here. So I wanted to touch on the fact that one of the things that you offer is this Big Five assessment that we've been talking about. And I hope, if you guys have been paying attention, if you don't see the value, and we had a conversation about this right after I did the assessment that was more deeper than this. And, we talked a lot longer one-on-one about this, which I got a lot of value out of. But if you haven't seen the value just in some of the stuff we talked about here, you're just not paying attention. But you offer a free, tell us about the offer that you have for folks.
Yeah, I will give the assessment to people who are interested, and I will go through it with them, with their results.
So
whoever wants
I can only speak for myself. You've seen a little bit of it because we talked a little bit about my assessment, but I got a lot out of it. And it was kind of like what I described when I was telling you about Greg Hartley, where I see it and I go, this looks like a magic trick. Like, how do you, it's
Yeah.
based on science. This stuff works.
Yeah. Mhm.
And I think it's all a function of, you got to have the right mindset going into it, because you might hear some things like when you said your top 20%, and I'm going, and then you say in
Perfectionism.
whatever perfectionism.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't want to. I'm not sure how to take it now, right?
Right.
But you have to go into this with the mindset that the whole I looked at this like the whole purpose of this is for me to learn more about myself, so that then I can take action on some of the things that I look at and go, I see how that's showing up in ways for me that's not helpful for me or for other people.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm totally comfortable with it, but it pisses somebody off, or, it causes friction in a personal relationship. So I think it's valuable for anyone to take advantage of that. We'll put all your information in the show notes. What's the best way though, for people to find you?
Yeah. My website is aboutnarrative.com, and my email, cclee@aboutnarrative.com. The company's name is Narrative, but the domain had to be About Narrative. So.
Okay, great. All right. So with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. And Caryn, I want to thank you very much for your time. And everyone, please, for yourself, take advantage of this. Get your assessment. Spend that half hour. It will blow your mind. Not just how much it will tell you about yourself, but in the conversation with Caryn, being able to see ways that you can use that are helpful to you. Right. So that's where I would leave it at.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for being here. Appreciate it.